Hi everyone, it's really great to be here. I was really looking forward to catching up with all of you this year at Agile Australia because I've been away in Berlin for 3 years. So hello to some familiar faces. I really look forward to some actual FaceTime with you really soon. But till then, the circles are great and I'm really excited to share with you some of my Berlin experience. Maybe not the nightclubs, but more the work. Um, so this story sort of starts in 2017, in the before times. I was lucky enough to get a chance to work with Greg Ellis and Rich Donnell again at a large property and car listing portal in Germany. The orgs was around 1,200 people in total, and so that's what we'll talk about today. It's publicly listed and it's split across Berlin and Munich. And property was in Berlin and cars were mostly in Munich. My clicker working. So in late 2017, most of the 1,200 people had never heard of OKRs, and neither had I, especially outside of tech. So why did they even think about adopting OKRs? So to give you some context of what was happening, our exec team had been aware of some issues for some time. There was a sense of investing in growth, spending a lot of money on talent, producing a lot of output. Everyone was really busy, but we weren't having the expected impact in the market. We wanted to increase our impact without increasing an already high investment profile. We also felt we had really heaps of competing priorities for our capacity, so a real lack of focus. We had this sense that perhaps some of our teams were focusing on the wrong thing, and as an organisation, we just weren't aligned on what was the most important thing to do. One department was focusing on one big important goal, and another department was focusing on another. In our engagement surveys, many of our people told us they were completely disconnected from our strategy and our purpose, a sense that we could completely revamp the way we communicated about and how transparent we were about the company level goals. We weren't succeeding at all in getting that across. So in late 2017, I'm minding my own business. I'm just 3 months into my role and I'm doing a project rescue delivery sort of management work when Rich comes up to me and says casually, let's try OKRs. Perhaps you could work on that. At the time, I had no experience with OKRs. I didn't know anything about them. And the largest change I'd ever been involved with back here in Australia was about 300 people introducing Agile across a department. Suffice it to say, there were some hard-won lessons and opportunities for growth I discovered along the way. And I hope that's why you're here, to hear about all the mistakes I made, and hopefully you don't have to make them yourself. So hopefully there's some lessons learned here today. Before I get into the details, what the hell is an OKR anyway? So OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results, and I wanted to share an example OKR. It has an objective, kind of a why. It has key results, which are the outcome or the impact that you're expecting. And then it has activities, things like initiatives, milestones, a roadmap, a plan. So on the surface, OKRs seem really simple. Why are we talking about them? That wasn't very hard to explain. They seem to be a really simple way to set a goal, to communicate a goal, and a really simple way to measure progress. Especially at, for a small scale, this would be really simple. The devil, as they always say, is in the details, and especially as you try to scale this out across an organisation, I think you'll find there's a lot of fun to be had. And let me share some of that fun today. Our first attempt at OKRs was when Rich, our CTO, wrote his first set for the tech function for a year. And he sent it to his tech leaders, including myself, as a first draft for discussion. So this is November 2017. Shortly after this, Thomas, our CPO, did exactly the same thing. He wrote a set of OKRs for the product function and sent them to his team. And this was really great. So big win. Early executive support and leading by example from the top was absolutely critical to our OKR journey. And I definitely would start there again with the execs, particularly product and tech. Unfortunately, it turns out this wasn't so great as well. One of our major learnings from trying this for 2 quarters, Q1 and Q2, was that having these separate OKRs for tech and product was a really big mistake. We were passing down problems of focus and alignment into the organization. The 2 sets of OKRs were competing and they cascaded down through teams. And we had this we built in conflict between the product function and the tech function. And the tech function at the time was being told the most important thing to do is to improve resilience. And the product function was being told the most important thing to do was to enter a brand new market. Suffice it to say, this is not an ideal situation and it did not provide focus. It wasn't working. So we decided to change it. We proposed to the executive team they must create a single set of joint OKRs across all the functions. The CPO, the CTO, the CSO, sales, finance. And this was the idea of cross-functional OKRs rather than individual or functional OKRs. It's a lot more difficult than you'd expect. We had to get everyone in the room at the same time. And if you've ever tried to run an executive workshop in the middle of a busy quarter, this is incredibly difficult. Once you have them in the room, every executive has their own set of priorities that they would like to be number one. So we went through endless rounds of PowerPoint, and the ELT, and particularly Rich, said to me, wow, one of our real lessons in this workshop was we have to be brutal with focus to cut down all of the things we want to achieve to the things that really matter. So these cross-functional OKRs were a really big improvement. The arguments about tech versus product versus sales started much earlier, so be warned. They started at the ELT level, and it really helped to highlight some maybe previously hidden trade-offs that we weren't arguing about at that exec level. So absolutely, fundamental fighting was happening. Arguments, very good. So you're winning if your exec are having a fight with each other as you're adopting OKRs, it turns out. So that's my tip number 1 today, is absolutely avoid individual OKRs like the plague, like the coronavirus. We would recommend, absolutely trying cross-functional OKRs as a starting point. It was such a good idea. I thought, I know what, let's cascade this pattern to every level in the organization. This is so great, we'll do it everywhere. So we decided to use the existing cross-functional leadership groups at the company, vertical, market segment and team. So that roughly aligned with our VPs, directors, and team leads. So we had a concept of what was called a market segment model, where we had, let's say, cars was a vertical and houses was a vertical. And then an example of a segment would be residential or commercial. And that would consist of a head of product, a head of tech, a head of sales. One of the major advantages to this cascade pattern was it really showed up differences in opinion, differences in priority between your executive and the VPs and between the VPs and the directors. It became really clear that vertical alignment was a major issue. At one point, we had execs shaking their head saying, how could the VPs think that this was the most important thing to work on? And more arguments ensued. Again, if you're having arguments, OKRs are working. So these discussions were very valuable, but I believe it's possible to have absolutely too much of a good thing. It turned out this 4 levels of OKRs was completely unwieldy. And it was this interconnected set of feedback and review that was really hard to manage. It's not recommended by most experts. And it took us just months to go from executive OKRs through vertical segment and then just the first 3 layers. Months, I tell you. So if I was going to do this again, I would do it differently. Christina Vodka says, just skip the VPs and directors entirely and try for 2 levels, like the company and the team is like a really interesting way to keep it simple. And Christina's got this great book called Radical Focus. So that would be my number 1 reading pick for today. And she's got an also free book on one of the libraries. So I can put in some reading recommendations after this talk so you can pick them up. But this is a great book. It's a good story about a small startup trying to use OKRs. So tip number 2 today, Avoid cascading your OKRs through every layer or every structure your company has. Try starting really simple, and I would start with just your company first and then pick some teams to give it a go. Looking at my first set of OKRs and also Rich's, they read like a roadmap or a to-do list. This is another example of an OKR, but this isn't recommended. What I've got here is a number of, activity key results. You can see everything is a doing verb. I completed a high-end roadmap. I'm building 80% of the product. I've interviewed 10 customers. I've designed an MVP and I've launched to market. This is what everyone's first OKR looks like. Sad to say, it's actually not a very good OKR. The reason for that is you can achieve everything on this list and have no impact. If you achieved everything on this list and nothing got better, would you be surprised? Probably, but you haven't actually measured any outcomes or impact in this OKR. You've only listed things you're going to do. It's a to-do list, not a key set of key results. So one way to help this situation, to make your OKRs more outcome focused, is to add a third part to the puzzle, to manage your activities, your initiatives, your to-do lists, and your roadmap. So this is the secret of a good OKR. They explain the why and the impact without constraining the how. I focus a lot of attention on this in trainings because most people find this separating of the why and the what pretty difficult. Importantly, this style of OKR with activities separated out from the OKR really supports an intent-based or mission command leadership style, which is obviously the style of leadership we're encouraging in Agile teams and in Agile leadership. In fact, this 3-bucket solution is so useful. I've put together an OKR canvas for you. So this allows you to sort of separate into 3 buckets your OKR. And it's now a free lesson in my Leading Change with OKRs course on Freshwater Academy. You should have a link to this in your email, and I'll put it in Slack in a bit, and I think it's on the mural as well. So you can click in there, download the cheat sheet and the canvas, which is just a Google Slides presentation that you make a copy of, type your stuff in. So feel free to steal that. I found it really useful for getting people thinking in those 3 separate buckets. So that's my third tip for today. Avoid activity or output-oriented key results. Try separating your OKRs from your activities and maybe using a canvas to sort of remind people that there is a difference between output and outcome. So we've talked about 3 things today. Things you maybe want to avoid because they really didn't work for us. Individual OKRs, cascading OKRs, and these output-oriented key results. And instead try and cross-functional, company, and OKRs plus activities. Luckily, some things did work the first time we tried them. So I wanted to share some of the wins so that you can maybe be like, hey, that was a good thing. Again, context specific, they may not work for you, but this is what worked for us. One of my favorite OKR authors is Philippe Castro. I really like his comment that focusing on the goals that you can control is terrible advice, that it creates silos because every problem that requires cross-team coordination becomes stranded. So this idea of work stranded in the white spacing, the org chart, really resonated with me. So how do we coordinate across the org structure? So one of the most useful ideas from OKRs that we got was around organising yourself around the objective rather than around the org chart. It turns out OKRs can provide a fundamental operating model for a more networked organisation. So if you're looking for a way, for example, to break down silos between departments or achieve significant cross-team initiatives, I really recommend this idea of virtual teams organised around shared OKRs. For example, one of our major objectives was to create a brand new market segment, new customer segment. And this obviously cut across many of our existing organisational structures. And using a virtual team organised around this shared OKR was a really fundamentally powerful way for us to create a dynamic organizational structure, and it quickly allowed us to make progress on a really strategic priority without having to do a reorg. So the virtual team met every week with representatives from all of the affected areas, and they would update weekly a shared OKR to measure progress and to track it. And this allowed us to sort of experiment as an organisation with a brand new organisational design. So this was the basis of actually a more permanent structural change. So we did create longer term organisational structures around this successful OKR. The idea of shared OKRs was so useful, I created an alignment canvas based on some work by Philippe Castro, who helped us with this. And basically the idea here is to identify potential shared owners for any OKR you write, find out who the supporters are and your dependencies, and who are the stakeholders who care. So I've made this also a free lesson in Freshwater Academy, so download that at your leisure. And the idea is you can keep track of how you're aligning an individual OKR if you're an OKR owner. Discussing it, reviewing it, agreeing it might be a way to keep track. Another really big win for us was the OKR Champions program. I wanted to distribute the leadership of the OKR program away from me and into every team. The impact I could have as one program manager was limited, especially across 1,200 people. So creating a role, like a champions role, was very like creating an Agile coaching role or a Scrum Master role, where you want an enabler or a facilitator role to help make OKRs work in your organisation. We asked for local volunteers in Berlin and Munich to sign up, to learn about OKRs, to support their teams and to help run the process. And to make the role more attractive, we offered a special OKR Champions training day, and we used an external speaker. In this case, our special guest star was Philippe Castro. He came to Berlin and he taught us OKRs. So we started providing online materials to the champions and then to others. Philippe provided us a beginner's guide from his website, and we went on to develop our own workshops and trainings. And you can see the resulting curriculum as an example. This is the one from Freshwater Academy, the one we've got right now. This is after many iterations of trying to figure out what are the important topics to teach if you're trying to do OKRs at scale. Luckily enough, my other role at the same time as being the OKR program owner was setting up a tech and product internal training academy. So inside the organisation, we had a way to offer trainings to people, and we used this platform to provide a regular OKR training as part of this change. One of the really exciting moments in that training program was when we realized we could offer OKRs for product managers or OKRs for product leaders as a special role training. And the product managers were key drivers, obviously, for the adoption of OKRs. And we ran sessions at their product offsite. We included experience reports from the pilot team, the quick wins pattern. And those quick wins really spread throughout the product managers, and they became the champions and owners and drivers of OKRs in our organisation. So all of our early success stories came from the product function. Obviously, introducing anything to 1,200 people, if you've tried to introduce Agile to 1,200 people, you'll know what this is like. It's an exercise in change management. I won't go into all the techniques that you know and love. There's plenty of people in the call, and actually I think if you're interested in learning more, there's an upcoming Agile Australia Circle or the Esther Derby that's going to be awesome, and there's a new book out as well. But I did want to mention one really tried and tested comms technique. It's coming up with a comms plan, that really being clear on how you're going to communicate about OKRs. And it turns out OKRs are almost like a perfectly built communication technique for large organizations. To start, I gave an overview of OKRs at an all-hands town hall. This is like the biggest audience I'd ever spoken to, and I didn't completely bomb it, but man, it's hard to talk to 1,200 people at once on virtual. Wow, that was really quite a thing. We had people giving regular updates. So here you can see Rich giving an update every 3 months at town halls, telling people how the OKR program was going, where were we up to. But if I look back over the 2 years it took us to adopt OKRs, I have like a favorite moment. My proudest moment was the first time a new CEO came in and he used OKRs to kick off a year. It was this moment, this is almost 14 months after starting our OKR journey, that it felt like the company was fully committed to OKRs and was actually using them to communicate the company's goals to the board and to the company. So I was really proud of this. This was like a really great moment for me. And it was surprising it took 14 months to get there, which almost felt like that was when we'd started after all the things I spoke about so far. So to summarize what we've talked about today, we've talked about cross-functional OKRs. We've talked about company and team keeping it simple. We talked about OKRs and activities and how you might separate them. Virtual and shared OKRs, OKR champions, the training you might need to do that. A little bit on change management, but tune into Esther to learn more about that. And communication being a key point. Looking at the time, there is a lot we probably don't have time to cover today. In particular, the end-to-end OKR cycle is really cool. This is a useful frame for doing more than just setting and forgetting. Classic mistake with OKRs is just setting them, and that's all. You might feel like that's great, but if you don't have any alignment or achievement processes, then you're in a lot of trouble. And for that, I highly recommend a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. So this is my recommended companion framework to OKRs. It has 4 pieces of advice, 4 disciplines, and it's particularly useful for creating a cadence of accountability, a weekly process around a compelling scoreboard for keeping track of where you're up to. And it's got quite good advice on how to create leading indicators as opposed to lagging indicators, which I think is a critical skill for leaders when they're implementing things like OKRs. So highly recommended book. There's lots more to learn. There are OKR tools that we can talk about. There's the OKR cycle. How do you schedule it? At one point, we changed from a 3-month cycle to a 4-month cycle, and that's a really interesting customization you can do. You can use OKRs as part of your leadership development program. And lastly, portfolio management is sort of a side topic, but it is impacted by OKRs. Like, how do you manage the work? How do you do your governance around initiatives? So that's a whole topic that we could talk about at another time. I've also been working on an OKR adoption playbook. So if you're currently thinking about adopting OKRs at any scale, please get in touch. I'll send you what I've got, and I'd love to hear what you're thinking about how you're going about your OKR adoption. I'd like to include case studies and suggestions from the community here. So I'd love your input to that. So lots more to learn. I'd like to invite you to join one of my upcoming classes. Leading Change with OKRs is a 3 2-hour session which covers the setting, aligning and achieving of OKRs. And adopting OKRs might be interesting if, as I said, you're actually trying to implement them at scale. So that's just 1 2-hour session, and it sort of takes you through the playbook. So actually, we've got one tomorrow at 10 o'clock if you want to be a very, very quick mover. And the 20% offer is in your email. I think it's in Mural, and we can put it in Slack and in the chat if you want. So there's a link to a bundle for both of those classes, which gives you even more of a discount. So please help me get my Freshwater Academy off the ground, and I would love to help you get started with OKRs. And with that, I just wanted to summarize with one sort of parting thought, which is that adopting OKRs successfully requires supportive leadership, sophisticated change management, an investment in learning, and probably more time and patience than you probably expected. So I really hope that was at least something in that talk that was useful. And we've got some time for Q&A, which is really great. So I'll hand over to Adina and Rachel to maybe run the questions. Yeah.